Thank you, Jamie. I joined the BBC Persian service in 2008, for which I moved from Iran to the UK. To me, it was an easy decision. I think most journalists around the world dream about working for one of the most reputable news organizations in the world. More importantly, I wanted to be able to report freely, without being censored, without being told what to write and what not to write, without being worried about arrest or punishment, or possible risks to my family. But little did I know that the Iranian authorities won't leave me alone, even when I'm outside the country. The intimidation started in 2009, soon after the disputed presidential elections, which we covered like any other story at the BBC. But the Iranian authorities started to systematically harass us. The list is long. Many relatives were called in for interrogations, from 90-year-old fathers to 10-year-old sisters. They were threatened that they would lose their jobs, their pensions, right to travel, or that their child might be accidentally killed in a car crash in London. The authorities wanted to threaten us that although we were not in Iran, they still have access to our loved ones back at home. My case unfolded in May 2013, when I called my father one day on his mobile phone, and he immediately asked me to call him on my uncle's landline. I instantly knew that something was up. My father didn't want to speak on his phone because he was worried it might be bugged. He said he had been interrogated for a couple of hours. They wanted to know about me and my husband. They wanted my address in London and my phone numbers. They threatened that if I didn't give up my job, there would be consequences. And there were. 5 months later, as he was about to board a flight to London to come and visit my newborn child, his passport was confiscated. My mother's passport was also confiscated 2 weeks later upon her return to Iran. For months, I didn't know whether I would ever get to see them again. I couldn't go home, and they couldn't leave Iran. For months, we didn't know how long our nightmare was going to last. We spent most of that year in front of Skype. Every time I hung up, I ran to my bedroom away from my child to cry. Finally, after months of my parents going to every intelligence ministry's office and courthouse, they managed to get an appointment with the judge. In fact, the judge said he watches BBC Persian and I'm a good reporter, but that my parents had to stop me. My father said, "Rana never listened to me as a teenager. There's no way I can stop her now." The judge said, "You raise her, you should be able to stop her." It was then that I found out that my parents were under a 1-year travel ban. Of course, I didn't believe that it was only going to be 1 year until I finally saw them at the end of that year. This chapter of my story had a relatively happy ending, but sadly, it hasn't been the same for many of my colleagues. In one case, a mother was diagnosed with cancer, and her condition deteriorated so quickly that she was unable to travel to a third country to visit her son. She died in front of Skype. She raised my colleague as a single mom, and he wasn't even able to carry her coffin. In another case, a father had a stroke and developed dementia. He couldn't understand why his favorite daughter didn't go to visit him. Every time my colleague phoned home, her father asked, "When are you coming? I miss you." And this nightmare is always with us. Every time a parent dies, we get together in London and hold a service in the memory of our colleague's loved one in Iran. We do this to offer support to a friend facing painful loss simply because it's too dangerous for him to go home, and mourn with those gathered around the grave. I personally fall into depression every time a colleague loses a parent. I know that one day, sooner or later, it will be my turn. More recently, the asset freeze has created trouble for many of my colleagues. It effectively freezes inheritance for their entire family. No one can buy or sell any assets connected to a BBC Persian named member of staff. The punishment is far-reaching. It's having a devastating effect on our brothers, our sisters, and our wider families. The guilt we feel about the difficulties we have created for our relatives is difficult to describe. My colleagues and I want our lives back. We want to be able to do our job without fear. My colleagues and I should not have to report threats to the police or look over our shoulders in London. We should not have to worry about sending our children to school on their own. We want to be able to return to our country safely and to see our families. We want to be able to do all the things you take for granted. Visit our parents, see our aunts and uncles, go to family weddings and to family funerals. We want to be able to visit our sick relatives before they die. I want my child to be able to see her country, to visit her grandparents, and to know her Iranian heritage. We don't want our families to suffer because of our choice of profession, and just because we work for the BBC. The asset freeze is preventing many of our family members from benefiting from their lifetime of hard work and from passing it on to their children. This is an unacceptable sanction because of our work as journalists. This is not just about our fundamental rights and those of our families. This is about the right to freedom of speech. It's about the right of Iranian citizens and the international community to receive objective and impartial information about current events in Iran, as well as events around the world, free from the influence of the authorities. We are here to ask for help. The abuse has to come to an end. Journalism is not a crime.